In 1498, Machiavelli watched a man he trusted hand his private correspondence directly to his enemies. The man had shown 7 specific behaviors in the weeks before. Machiavelli wrote them down. He spent the next 20 years studying them across courts, armies, and councils. The pattern never changed. These 7 signs appear every time, without exception, before a betrayal. Tonight, you learn all 7. Think about the last time someone you trusted burned you. Not a stranger, not an obvious enemy, not the person who had already shown you friction, coldness, or hostility. Someone you had time with, someone you had built something real with, someone you had defended in rooms they were not in, someone you would have called without hesitation if something went wrong at 2 in the morning. And then something happened. Not all at once, gradually. The ground moved beneath a relationship you believed was solid, and you did not feel it until you were already falling, until the damage was already done, until the people who needed to see you a certain way had already been shown something different, and the showing had not come from your enemies. It had come from inside your circle. Maybe it was a colleague who seemed supportive for months, who asked about your projects, your process, your plans, your thinking, and who used what you shared to position themselves above you at the precise moment it mattered most. Maybe it was a friend who knew exactly who to talk to and exactly what to say to quietly reshape your reputation in a circle where your reputation had real value. Maybe it was someone closer than that, someone who smiled the most, who listened the most, who knew the most, and who used all of it in ways you only understood afterward. And the thing that stays with you, the thing that does not diminish over time, is not the betrayal itself. Betrayal you can process. People fail each other. That is survivable. What you cannot process is that you missed it. The signs were there. You felt them in the way that the body knows things before the mind admits them. That low, unplaceable frequency in certain conversations. That faint feeling of being watched rather than seen. That moment where something they said did not quite match the direction they claimed to be pointing. You felt all of it, and you called it paranoia. You called it anxiety. You told yourself you were being unfair to someone who had given you no reason for doubt. You were not being unfair. You were being accurate, and you silenced yourself because the cost of being right was too high to face. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anyone who has ever studied power, because it happened to him, repeatedly. He spent 2 decades inside the political machinery of Florence watching men build quiet campaigns against each other, warming faces in corridors, coordinating in shadows, filing information in conversations that looked like friendship. He saw the pattern so many times that it stopped feeling like personal experience and started feeling like architecture. He realized it was not about individual malice. It was about a consistent, reproducible mechanics, the same 7 moves in the same sequence every time. He wrote them down so that the men who came after him would not have to learn them the way he did. Today, you learn them. The person plotting against you is not who you picture when you imagine a threat. You have a mental image of what danger looks like. Someone difficult, someone with whom you have friction, someone who has already shown you coldness, disagreement, open competition. That person is not the threat. They have already shown their hand. You already factor them into your calculations. The threat is the warm one. The threat is the person who has never once created a moment of visible friction between you, who asks how you are doing and waits for the full answer, who remembers specific details about your life, your goals, your fears, your frustrations with certain people, and references them in ways that feel like genuine attentiveness, who shows up consistently, supportively, enthusiastically in all the right moments. That consistency, that warmth, that memory. Most of the time, in the vast majority of relationships, these behaviors are exactly what they appear to be. They are the behaviors of a person who genuinely values you, who is actually curious about your life, whose attentiveness is real. But Machiavelli documented what happens in the small number of cases where these exact behaviors serve an entirely different function, where the warmth is a delivery mechanism, where the memory is a filing system, where the attentiveness is intelligence gathering wrapped in the language of care. He wrote in The Prince that the most dangerous opponents in any court were not those who opposed you openly. They could be counted, tracked, defended against, but those who opposed you while maintaining the appearance of support. He called it the simulation of loyalty, and he identified it as the one attack that a prince almost never sees until it is too late. Because if you trust someone, you open your life to them. You share your thinking in real time before it is finished. You reveal what you are uncertain about. You name the people you have friction with. You describe the vulnerabilities in your situation that you would never announce to an enemy. And you hand them, without ever realizing it, everything required to move against you from the inside, from a position so protected by your own trust that you will not even look there when you try to understand what happened. The open enemy can only attack what you show them. The trusted one attacks what you believed was hidden. This is why the 7 signs matter. None of them are signs of hostility. They are subtler than that. They are the behavioral fingerprint of a person who is building something against you while the architecture of your trust keeps them invisible. Before we name the signs, you need to understand why you are not naturally built to see them. There is a mechanism in social psychology called the halo effect. Once you have decided that someone belongs in the trust category, once you have categorized them internally as a friend, an ally, someone for you, your brain applies that categorization to nearly everything they subsequently do. Their actions are filtered through the assumption of loyalty before you consciously register them. Information that confirms the categorization is amplified and filed as confirmation. Information that contradicts it is minimized, reinterpreted, or not registered at all. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a feature of cognitive efficiency. The brain cannot process every social signal at full resolution simultaneously. It uses categories to conserve processing power. You trust this person. Therefore, their behavior does not require the same level of scrutiny as the behavior of someone you do not trust. The plotter, consciously or not, exploits this feature with precision. By establishing themselves in the trust category first, through early warmth, through helpfulness, through demonstrating reliability in small things, they purchase protection from scrutiny in the larger things. Every subsequent action is automatically interpreted charitably, and that charitable interpretation is the environment they need. It is the cover under which the real work happens. Robert Cialdini documented what Machiavelli observed 5 centuries earlier in practice. Liking is one of the most powerful drivers of trust and compliance. We believe people we like. We share more with people we like. We do not scrutinize the motives of people we like. Scrutiny feels like a kind of ingratitude, an insult to someone who has been warm to us. And the plotter does not need to be genuinely likable. They need to perform likability consistently enough that the performance becomes your working reality. There's also the phenomenon psychologists call motivated reasoning. Once you have made an emotional investment in a relationship, once you have shared things, defended someone, built a history with them, you become cognitively motivated to protect that investment. Admitting that someone you trusted and confided in is operating against you means admitting that your judgment failed, that the intimacy was partly a performance, that the things you shared in trust were processed as intelligence. Most people find this too psychologically expensive to accept, so they see the signs and they do not see them. They file the discomfort under anxiety and move on. Daniel Kahneman's research on System 1 and System 2 thinking makes this explicit. System 1, fast, emotional, instinctive, is where trust lives. System 2, slow, deliberate, analytical, is where scrutiny happens. Most social interaction runs entirely through System 1. You feel whether something is right. You do not analyze it. And the plotter, who operates in the warmth they have carefully established, lives inside your System 1 and is almost never referred to System 2 for examination. Unless you know what to look for. These 7 signs are the referral to System 2. They are the specific, observable, reproducible behaviors that appear in the trust category and do not belong there. Their questions are always after specific information. The first sign lives in the architecture of how they ask. A person who is genuinely curious about your life asks broadly, "How are things? What have you been working on? How did that go?" The questions are open. They do not have a direction. They follow wherever you lead. The person who is mapping your terrain asks differently. Their questions are precise, specific, consistently angled toward the mechanics of your situation rather than the meaning of it. Not how did you feel about the negotiation, but how exactly did the negotiation unfold, and what does your manager think of the outcome, and who else was in the room, and what did they say afterward? They want the structure, the hierarchy, the relationships, the specific opinions of specific people about specific things. They want to understand who trusts you, who doubts you, where the friction is, where your influence reaches and where it stops. And they collect this gradually, one conversation, one detail, One casual exchange at a time, never enough in a single sitting to trigger your awareness, but cumulative, filed, returned to in ways you will not notice until you trace it backward later. Machiavelli called this the art of strategic listening, the deployment of apparent interest as a mechanism for intelligence. It is not curiosity, it is cartography. They are drawing a map of your world, and the flattery of their attention makes you want to give them accurate directions. Pay attention to the angle of the questions, whether they are consistently after mechanics rather than meaning, whether someone who claims to care about you has a detailed understanding of your situational structure and a much vaguer sense of who you actually are. They are most present at the moment of your visible success. The second sign is positional. Watch where people appear in your life and when, not just who shows up when things are good, everyone appears when things are good. Watch specifically for the person who materializes at the precise moment of a visible achievement, a promotion, a deal completed, a relationship that became public, a project that succeeded in ways others could see. And watch how carefully they attend to the details of that achievement. They want to know exactly what happened, the sequence of events, what you did and what others did, who knows about it and how widely, how significant it truly is and what it means for your position going forward. They measure your altitude with the precision of a surveyor. This is not celebration, it is assessment. Machiavelli documented this pattern relentlessly across the courts he navigated. Every time a prince gained significant power or visibility, the court's most strategically dangerous members appeared immediately, warm, congratulatory, deeply interested. Not because they were happy for the prince, because power had shifted and they needed to understand exactly how much, in which direction, and what that shift created in terms of threat and opportunity. Their proximity to your achievement is not affection, it is reconnaissance. The genuine friend who is happy for you does not need the full debrief. They share the joy without requiring the complete accounting of its dimensions. The plotter needs the dimensions. They need to understand exactly how significant you have become, because that determines how significant a target you now represent. If someone appears most vividly in your life at the precise moment of your visible success, and their interest is consistently more in the mechanics than in the meaning, pay attention to where they are standing. They do not defend you when you are absent. The third sign is a silence. And silences are the hardest signals to register, because the absence of something is more difficult to notice than its presence. You have to be looking for it specifically. Machiavelli wrote that loyalty is most legible not in what people say to your face, but in what they say about you when it would cost them something to say it well. A person who genuinely values your relationship will push back when your name is used as a target in a room you are not in. Not loudly, not performatively, with the quiet, consistent resistance of someone who actually has a stake in how you are perceived. The plotter does not do this. They may not actively circulate information against you. They may say nothing directly negative. But when others do, when your name appears in a negative context in a conversation they are part of, they are silent. Or they offer the carefully calibrated non-defense. I understand why you might see it that way. Or, I hear you, language that validates the attack without explicitly launching one. They provide no friction to the narrative being constructed about you in rooms you cannot enter. Because that narrative, building slowly, serves the larger purpose. This sign requires a specific kind of intelligence work. You need to know what is being said in rooms you are not in. You need people, genuinely loyal people, not gossips, who will tell you what the conversation looks like when you leave it. This information is uncomfortable. Most people avoid seeking it because what you do not know cannot hurt your relationships. But Machiavelli was ruthless about this. He wanted to know exactly how he was perceived in every room he was absent from, because that was where the real politics happened. When you discover that someone who is warm to your face is consistently silent, not hostile, just absent, from your defense in moments that cost them nothing to provide it, you have found the third sign. They introduce small doubts about your closest allies. The fourth sign is the most elegant and the most destructive. The plotter does not come for you directly. That would make them visible. That would put them inside your awareness as a threat. Instead, they come for the infrastructure around you, the people you rely on, the relationships that support your judgment, your standing, and your sense of reality. It begins small, a carefully placed observation delivered with genuine-seeming concern. I noticed your colleagues seemed a bit disengaged during your presentation. I'm sure they were just distracted. Not an accusation, a seed, something plausible, something you might file without examining. Then another, several weeks later, in a different context. I overheard your friend in the corridor. I'm sure it was taken out of context. Another seed, another nearly invisible movement of the ground beneath a relationship you depend on. Over months, these observations accumulate in your psychology, and because they arrive from someone you trust, someone who appears to be looking out for you, you weight them seriously. You begin to see your allies differently, to question small things you previously would have absorbed without thought, to share slightly less, to trust slightly less, to become, over time, more isolated without ever being aware of the isolation happening. This is the strategy Machiavelli considered most dangerous, not the direct attack, which can be identified and resisted. The quiet, gradual dismantling of your alliances, which leaves you standing alone without ever feeling the ground move beneath your feet. By the time you understand what has happened, the isolation is already structural. Watch for the person who consistently introduces small doubts about the people closest to you. A single observation is nothing. A pattern of observations, all gently pointing in the same direction, all subtly eroding your confidence in the people who support you most, is the fourth sign. They have an exceptional memory for what you said in weakness. The fifth sign lives in what they remember. Everyone forgets things. Conversations blur together over time. Details fade. This is normal and human. But the plotter has an exceptional, nearly perfect memory for one specific category of information. The things you said when your guard was down. The frustration you expressed about a colleague 3 months ago that you had moved past. The doubt you voiced about your own work in a moment of genuine uncertainty that you did not intend to be defining. The thing you said about someone in a flash of irritation that represented a momentary feeling, not a permanent assessment. The private fear you admitted once in a conversation you thought was sealed by trust. They remember these things, not everything, selectively. Precisely the things that reveal your vulnerabilities, your private frustrations, your instabilities, the points where your own confidence has been uncertain. A person who genuinely values you treats this information with care. They know it was said in a human moment. They do not reference it in contexts where its circulation could damage you. They do not quote it back in ways that make the private public. They hold it as part of the texture of knowing someone well, not as material. The plotter keeps a file, and the file is uniquely powerful because the information in it came from your own mouth, in your own voice, in a moment of genuine honesty. It cannot be dismissed as the opinion of an enemy. It is what you said about yourself, about your own doubts, about your own frustrations with the situation. Repeated in the right context to the right people, it becomes not a vulnerable moment but evidence of a pattern, a problem, a limitation, a reason to reassess confidence in your judgment. Watch what someone has retained about you over time. Not the facts of your life. Anyone who pays attention accumulates those. Watch whether they have a particular, almost forensic retention for the specific things you said in moments when you were most uncertain. That memory has a purpose, and the purpose is not friendship. Their interest sharpens precisely when you stumble. The sixth sign is tonal and requires careful attention to register. When something goes wrong for you publicly, a project that fails, a professional misstep, a loss of standing in a context that matters, the plotter will say the right things. They will express sympathy. They will offer support. They will be present in the way that friends are supposed to be present. But something in the texture changes. There is a specific, almost imperceptible increase in energy, in attentiveness, in the frequency of their contact, in the depth of their questions. They appear more often. They check in more. They want to understand the situation in full detail. They are available in ways they were not available before. They seem, in some hard-to-name way, more alive around your failure than they were around your stability. They are not energized by concern. They are energized by information. Your failure is data. It tells them something precise about your current standing, about where the vulnerabilities in your position have become exposed, about where pressure could be applied most effectively. And they need to understand those vulnerabilities with the specificity of an engineer studying a structure they intend to stress. The support is real in its performance. The purpose behind the presence is not. Machiavelli observed that the most dangerous period for any prince was never the defeat itself, but the period immediately following it, when men who had appeared fully loyal began quietly repositioning. The repositioning was always subtle. It was never announcement. It was merely availability, presence, the specific attentiveness of someone who has sensed movement in the landscape and needs to be close enough to it to benefit. Watch the quality of their support when you stumble. Genuine support is most intense at the moment of failure and gradually relaxes as things stabilize, because it was about the pain, not the information. The plotter's interest sharpens at your low points and dims at your recovery, because the recovery reduces the opportunity. They position themselves between you and decisions that affect you. The seventh sign is structural. It appears later than the others, when enough trust has been established and enough information has been gathered to move toward the final phase. They begin to insert themselves into the processes and relationships that determine your outcomes. They offer to relay a message between you and someone important. They volunteer to represent your interests in a meeting you cannot attend. They become the intermediary in a relationship that matters to your standing. They offer to handle something on your behalf, and all of this is done helpfully, generously, without any visible agenda, as a favor. But information that flows through an intermediary is information that can be filtered, delayed, reframed, selectively omitted, or deliberately colored. The message you sent may not arrive in the form you composed it. Their description of the meeting you did not attend may not reflect what actually happened. Their representation of your position in a conversation you were not part of may serve a set of interests that is not yours. Machiavelli was absolute on this point in The Prince. He wrote that any leader who governs primarily through intermediaries does not actually govern, that the person who stands between the leader and the information the leader requires holds real, structural power over that leader regardless of title, role, or stated loyalty. The person who controls the flow of information to you controls the reality you are operating from. And a person operating from a distorted reality makes decisions that serve the distortion, without ever knowing that the ground has been shaped beneath them. Watch for the person who consistently volunteers to be in the middle. The helpfully available intermediary who is always ready to represent you, always eager to be useful in the specific places where information flows between you and things that matter to your future. That helpfulness is the seventh sign. These are the seven. None of them individually are proof of anything. Together, as a pattern, as a cluster of behaviors appearing consistently from a single person over time, they constitute what Machiavelli called the unmistakable fingerprint of the quietly positioned threat. The most completely documented case of all seven signs operating simultaneously is not drawn from fiction or legend. It is drawn from one of the best recorded political betrayals in Western history. In the months before March 15th, 44 BC, Marcus Junius Brutus displayed every one of these signs in his interactions with Julius Caesar. He was warm, consistently, visibly, reliably warm. He had a reputation for personal integrity that made his warmth feel like principled affection, the loyalty of a man who valued Caesar not for power but for character. He asked careful, intelligent questions about Caesar's plans, always framed as the curiosity of an invested ally, as admiration, as the natural interest of someone who was thinking alongside him. He was present at Caesar's most significant political achievements. He positioned himself repeatedly as an intermediary in relationships that mattered to Caesar's standing with the Senate. He remembered, with precision that felt like depth of care, the frustrations Caesar had expressed about his own position, about the limits of the Senate's trust, about the men who had privately doubted him. And he used those remembered vulnerabilities, not with Caesar, but in the rooms Caesar was not in, to construct a case for why Caesar had become a danger to everyone around him. He introduced doubt, gradually, carefully, about the men closest to Caesar. He let certain protective relationships weaken without visibly cutting them. And in the weeks before the Ides, he inserted himself with remarkable effectiveness between Caesar and the senatorial networks that might have delivered a warning. Caesar, one of the most strategically capable minds in Roman history, missed all seven signs, not because he was unintelligent, because Brutus had established himself in the trust category so completely and so early that everything he did afterward was filtered through that categorization without scrutiny. Caesar had decided Brutus was loyal, and that decision protected Brutus from examination in the way that a categorization always protects its subject. The last words Caesar reportedly spoke were addressed to Brutus, not to the senators, not to the conspirators who had moved first, to the man whose presence in that moment was the most impossible to accept. Et tu, brute? The shock in those words is not the shock of a man who was ambushed by a stranger. It is the shock of a man who had been looking at 7 signs for months and had called them something else every time. Machiavelli studied this case in specific detail. He returned to it across multiple works because he considered it the purest available illustration of the principle. He wrote that it is not intelligence that protects a man from this kind of betrayal. It is the willingness to apply to the people you trust the same quality of attention you apply to the people you doubt. To move the trusted person, temporarily, deliberately, out of the trust filter and look at what the behavior actually shows. Caesar did not do this. Machiavelli, after his own betrayal in 1513, after the arrest, the torture, the exile at the hands of men who had known him for years and had filed everything he had ever shared with them, made sure that he did. Here is the part you have already suspected since sign 2. You know who this is. You have been reading these 7 signs and a face has been appearing. The same face with each sign, the same voice behind each behavior. You have been recognizing something that you have known for longer than tonight, something you have felt in the specific frequency of certain conversations, in the moments that did not quite land right, in the things that were said, and the way they were said. Something you have been explaining away for weeks or months or possibly years. Give yourself the permission to stop explaining it away. The most uncomfortable truth in Machiavelli's body of work is not about power or strategy or the nature of courts and politics. It is this: the people most likely to move quietly against you are not typically people you have wronged. They are people you have helped, people you have advocated for in rooms they were not in, people you have shared things within the genuine belief that the sharing built something, people you have trusted with your real thinking, not the polished version, the real one. The plotting does not come from hatred. Machiavelli was explicit about this. It comes from something quieter and in many ways more difficult to accept: competition. The specific, burning psychological experience of being in proximity to someone whose presence makes your own feel less significant. You did not do this to them intentionally. You simply existed in a way that created a problem in their internal landscape. And they chose to solve that problem not by addressing their own psychology, but by adjusting yours, by reducing your standing, by building quietly against you in the ways that the 7 signs describe. You cannot prevent this by becoming smaller. Machiavelli was ferocious on this point. A prince who diminishes himself to prevent the envy of those around him does not eliminate the envy. He eliminates the thing that provoked it and gains nothing in its place. You cannot protect yourself by shrinking into a version of yourself that does not create the problem. You protect yourself by seeing more clearly, by knowing what the signs are, by applying them. And here is the second truth. Once you see the pattern, once the 7 signs have aligned into something undeniable, most people still hesitate to act on what they know. Because acting means naming it. Naming it means accepting it. Accepting it means acknowledging that someone you gave real access to was doing something with that access that was never in your interest. That the warmth you returned was not what it appeared to be. That you were, in some portion of the relationship, a resource being managed rather than a person being known. This is a psychologically expensive conclusion, and most people will pay almost anything not to reach it. Machiavelli had no patience for this hesitation. He wrote that the prince who identifies that his foundation has been compromised and does not act immediately has made a choice. The choice is to allow the damage to continue on the plotter's timeline rather than address it on his own. That choice is made from sentiment, from the desire to protect the emotional investment in the relationship over the strategic necessity of protecting yourself.